Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't really see you because I've got the lights in front of my face. But for those who don't know me, I'm a mangrove ecologist, and I've been working in mangroves for about 40 years. Thank you. It's very kind words, thank you, Janelle. I don't usually get introduced this way because in science it tends to be a bit of a battlefield amongst our peers when we go for our meetings. And I've just come from a conference in Sydney, which is this network group of our colleagues, and it's something that we've now gotten into doing each year, but I sort of sometimes hesitate to be involved in it because in a sense, because it's something I started and I'm not sure how much it's going to snowball and get too big, because I like to keep the meetings small. Like our meeting now is a good size. I like a crowd like this. I can get a chance to meet people. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about mangroves, and I've written a book that you're all welcome to look at if you are not familiar with it. There's a copy out there, but there's also a copy here, Australia's Mangroves. So I'm considered a specialist in mangroves, and I've named probably about 6 or 7 of the different mangrove species that we have in the world. But I've also got some apps out there too, which is something for our more recent generation to jump into and obviously do better from, because all this is a progression. My aim tonight is to extend on the collaboration that we're developing with the class at the Mackay Christian College to look at the carbon accumulation that mangroves achieve. That is just one of their benefits. Other ones you'll well appreciate, and my talk tends to be a little bit more focused towards that one, which is the relationship with fish. So without further ado, I'll jump into talking about, following on from my presentation. But firstly I want to, hold on, let's figure it out. I've got it now? Yep, I've got it. Right, no, it's not working. Got it. I'm a Mac user, so it's a little bit different trying to work on a PC. One of those things. Anyway, but flying in, when I flew in a few years ago, it's obviously the grey hair, so it's not that long, but it is. I flew into Mackay, and all I could see as I flew in, the airport flies over the mangroves and things, there's dead mangroves. So this is 2000 or earlier. In this case, this photo's from June, and I could see dead mangroves forever. And it was really something. I got on the ground and I was sort of gobsmacked, sort of like, what do you do? I mean, what do you say when people ask about it? But I'm happy to inform you that, okay, there's some history in there, and I won't go into the details. You probably know a lot about it already, about the relationship with the herbicides washing down in an unseasonal rainfall event, and obviously causing some damage, considerable damage, not only in the Pioneer estuary, but the estuaries to the north and the south, right down to Sandringham Bay. There's considerable damage. But I'm happy to say that like in this Google Earth image here, which is more recent, 2017, and that was my recollection as well, that there was green mangroves that were dying before are no longer looking like that. It's a naive sort of way of making an assessment, but it's a start, and it's certainly the one that led me to the dieback before. I'm happy to say that it's in better shape now. So I can focus on this talk, I can extend a little further, I'll come back to that theme of dieback as I get going. Essentially, what makes mangroves important is essentially most people think of the relationship with fish, and that fish habitat equals, a healthy habitat equals healthy fish. And I guess you only need to talk to a fisherman to get that view. But this view is wider, and of course it can extend even further back to indigenous forebears in this country, where they use mangroves extensively. They had steeped in cultural values with, taking bark shields, etc., off the Abyssinia tree. As a few people in the audience will know what tree that is. It's actually pictured here. But you can see in the background also, it's also about fishing. And that, I suppose I'll come back on that theme again. So essentially when fishermen are out in their boat and they're thinking about what they're catching, they're thinking about what's below the water. So the image is very much about all these fish under the boat, essentially, and how they can hook onto one. So we'll build on that. So what makes mangroves special? I'll jump to a broader question now, and why are mangroves growing where they are? Essentially, it can be summed up very simply that they're trees and shrubs that grow in salt water, and they have an ability to prosper in those environments where all other plants are excluded because of the inhospitability, the uncomfortable nature of having that salt there. But do you know that mangroves only occupy half the tidal zone, and that they only occupy from mean sea level up to the high water mark? It's really an important observation, and one that early surveyors did not really recognise, and has created problems for us now, where you have land, or at least sea edge, marked out at the edge of the mangroves, where in fact that's mean sea level, it's not the high water mark. And so there's complications created. So there's understanding something about this habitat and where it is and why it's there is extremely important to understanding, something about obviously looking after it, but also about the benefits that we derive from this habitat. And there's a bunch of species there. So I was going to talk about that there in Australia we have about 46 different mangrove species in the country. In the world there's only 80. So it's a small number of plants, but they come from a wide range of different plant families. So they are extremely diverse, even though they're in small numbers. It's a really important point. So that mangroves have evolved probably about 30 times independently from different plant families. So there's salt tolerance and the ability to live in soils that have no air and oxygen in them. And around Australia, they're more warm-loving. They like to grow around the tropical parts. They only extend sort of almost reluctantly into the colder parts of the country, and that's reflected in the fact that they're in Tasmania. There are no mangroves there yet. Okay. And clearly I'm saying that with great meaning because we're in a changing world. But I have to also point out that there were mangroves in Tasmania 40 million years ago. It sounds like a horribly long time ago, but it tells you that the climate has changed in the past and that conditions were different in earlier eras of the cycle of life. Anyway, I want to pursue the idea about the habitat and extending on the idea that fish require this habitat, but there's also a bunch of other animals, as we well know, birds. A lot of people here will know more about that far more than me. That birds are frequenting the mangroves considerably, and of course there is an interaction as well with a mangrove associated group of plants, the salt marsh and salt pans, as well as with the mud flats out the front. But did you know that turtles also use mangroves? That they have been seen grazing on the fruits of the mangroves at high tide, and then going back to eating seagrass as the tide drops. There's so few photographs of this, well, there were none. So I actually commissioned an artist to draw a picture, and it's that picture in the bottom middle there. It's rather large artwork to illustrate what the observers have noticed and have published about turtles in mangroves. It's very important, as well as everything else. But essentially, then we now get to those values, again, those ecosystem services. And I've talked about habitat, I've talked about the component of habitat, which is the fish use, and the fisheries that are associated with mangroves, and that these have some of the strong values. But there's also shellfish there, oysters on occasion, and used to be a lot more when the waters were clearer. And of course mud crabs and other things. But also mangroves have great value, and we have trouble quantifying the habitat value, even if it's related to fisheries. People are very reluctant to put a number, a dollar value on that service that they provide in that sense. So imagine the trouble they would have when they try to put a value on mangroves where they protect shorelines, because the presence of this vegetation does what other vegetation does in active or sloping areas. You have put vegetation on hillsides to stop erosion. Well, so it is on shorelines. Mangroves naturally, or even unnaturally, you can plant them onto shorelines with a bit of cunning, and they can protect that shoreline and slow down the effects. So, but they're also coastal buffers in the sense that they can absorb nutrients and sediments or hold up sediments, etc. So essentially they can also take on a role that we consider to be kidneys. So they're coastal kidneys. And that is another value that mangroves have. How do you put dollars on that? It's another one of those very difficult questions. A lot of smart people are trying to do that so that these environmental services can be evaluated in the context of human development, which has a very distinctive dollar value on it. When you're building some shoreline construction, whether it be a port or a casino or something else. And of course there's values in the sense that mangroves also produce carbon and organic matter, and of course that could be food, so it could be coastal productivity, but it also can be just carbon that's just bound up in both the trees but also buried in the sediments and held there. And mangroves, we know, are 5 times better at doing that than trees on the land. 5 times better. They can take up carbon and take it out of the atmosphere. So if you're going to spend dollars on rehabilitation, mangroves are the place to do it if you're looking at carbon value. And of course, there's a lot of talk about putting a dollar value on carbon. And of course we can get to aesthetic value. It's always nice to have a green verge, etc. And this extends into the idea that mangroves can be used as gardens. Talk to anyone that's doing any civic developments or parkland reclamations. Think about the mangroves as parkland. Don't think about it as something on the edge. Actually build it in. Build the shoreline to accommodate mangroves and get the mangroves you want in these built-on shorelines. You can do it. You can have short mangroves or long ones, and you can have different ones that flower and fruit. You can have ones that attract bees and get honey. You can design your mangrove foreshore in these urban, built-up, already altered areas. That's really important, I think, because the habitat values will be the same as a natural stand ultimately. And of course, the last point I've got on there, which essentially is, well, what's that? Essentially, mangroves are, by looking at them and understanding why they're changing and why they're reacting in a certain way, are valuable indicators of not only their condition. So a sick mangrove is a sick mangrove, but there's something else. You can interpret from your sick mangrove whether this is something to do with catchment runoff, or is it to do with the last storm that came by, or is it the oil spill that happened last week? I mean, you can relate your indicator of the condition of this. And well, I don't know if I'll get time, but essentially that's what we're focusing on a lot these days now with the research, is to look at capturing these indicators so that we can apply them to a healthy waterways kind of report card assessment. So what happens if we lose mangroves? So we've got all these values, and are mangroves threatened? Well, we've already talked about what happened here in 2000, or probably a little earlier when the actual incident occurred, but where the dead mangroves are occurring. So mangroves are threatened. They are plants that have tolerances and limits to those tolerances, so that there's a point where they will die back. And what happens if they do, right? How's it going to affect the fish habitat? They're all important questions. I don't have any answers for the Pioneer River, and I don't have any answers for this particular episode, which is about the Gulf of Carpentaria. You might have heard recently about the dieback in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Now that was far bigger than it happened on the East Coast. We're talking about over 1,000, probably nearly 2,000 kilometres of coastline was affected. 2,000 kilometres of coastline. I mean, so the Gulf of Carpentaria, and in that one incident, in one sort of short period, about a month or so, 7,000 to 8,000 hectares of died. 7,000 to 8,000 hectares. I mean, it just blew us away when we saw this happen. But yeah, there's a big story about that. I won't go into it. But essentially, there's a dieback incident there. We don't know how it's affected the Gulf fisheries at this stage, but that's one of the research questions that's being asked. So we've got some other pictures there to show you the extent of the dieback, and these are the sort of images like the one on the top on the right. That was one of the first images that I saw, but then when I saw the same or similar images from 500 or 600 kilometres from that site, then the gravity of the situation became real, and of course the mapping afterwards confirmed everything. Essentially, dieback is not new. The Brisbane River, and I dare say in the Pioneer as well, there's been massive changes to the area of mangroves over the time. The reason I'm pointing out for the Brisbane River is that not only that is this a case where you had 62% loss of mangroves, but in this river system we had something that was really special, and as another indicator of that we could pick, because you can always measure the extent of mangroves. You get aerial photographs and satellite images and all that sort of thing. But what we had in the Brisbane River, if you can see the island, Fisherman's Island, no, you can't read it, it's hopeless. This island here, right here, is Fisherman's Island. There's a fisherman who, among other places, he has been fishing these areas for 30 years, John Page. And he keeps, which was totally overwhelming to me, a daily diary. Whoops, I'll go back one. No. Okay. Okay. A daily diary of his fish catch. What fish he caught, how many, and he's kept this religiously for more than 30 years. And he's actually said, well, I could have a look at it. Okay, and it's not just this; it's a book for every year, right? So 30 books. Right? It's a bit overwhelming, but I've managed to get a few students involved, and we've actually recorded all those catches. So what's it tell us about the Brisbane River and that 62% of mangrove loss? Essentially, we can see the fish catch, like for flathead, which is a fish that does depend on mangroves. It's a flathead. But essentially, you can see after there's an initial rise in his catch as he learned how to catch them. But after that, he knows how to fish them now, but it's still the catch is going down. But what's that correlate with? So if you to map out the area of mangroves lost, it actually matches that curve. one for one, more or less, as you can see in that image there. The images in the lower graph are showing the area or loss of area of mangroves over the same time period. So we can conclude from that and other evidence that less mangroves means less fish. And there's a few small examples, or good examples, where we can make these relationships clear and what to do about it. So ask that question again, what happens when you lose your mangroves? Well, I expect that the fish would be influenced by this as well, and that their numbers would decline rapidly. There will be fish, but they won't be the same fish. That's also another point. And they'll probably just be the migrant fish that are coming by and just be gone, there and gone, not the resident fish. It's all complicated, but there would be less fish. What we learn from all these incidences is that mangroves are vulnerable and they're sensitive to change. So whether that change is from what people are doing in development projects or whatever, or if it's to do with sea level rise or climate change, all these things are happening, but the mangroves are responding. So what do we do about this is the question I want to quickly pose, and that we need to assess the health of these ecosystems and be monitoring them on a regular basis. So with Mangrove Watch, the organisation that I've started with Jock McKenzie, we've developed a set of easy-to-use methods that can be applied. We're applying what we call the long plot method here to do the structural evaluations with the college. But the core business of Mangrove Watch goes around that top one. It's called SVAN, which is not meant to be too cryptic, but it's meant to be the Shoreline Video Assessment Method, acronym for it. And that involves people filming riverbanks and so forth, and it could be community groups, it could be Indigenous rangers, it can be scientists either in boats or helicopters. I mean, the same methodology, and the tools of the trade are in that picture with everybody in it, showing the video camera here, there's a GPS unit here, there's a clapperboard, because it's a proper movie set, and a boat driver at the back. Among others, there's note takers and people taking records. We've got a very distinct way or at least a training program to bring people up to speed, and also a set of equipment to be used in that context. Essentially, it involves filming a shoreline from a boat, so you don't have to damage the mangroves by walking around in them, which is always worrying to me. Try to minimise that as much as possible. So this boat method gets us over that, and of course the boat is it's got a reduced number of people in the boat in that picture. But I want to also make sure that I emphasise that it's also that the bit we're doing with long plots is this field validation section over here, doing the groundwork, getting the location from the satellite. We can relate images there and also relate it to satellite imagery, to get proper spatial distribution of things, of the area of what we see, from the photographs on the ground, and the measurements on the ground. And getting down to business is simple enough. I've already described some aspect of the equipment, but you can see it in use in these pictures. And it also can be walked if the coastline is too shallow or unnavigable. You can walk the coast, or you can do transects. You can even do that way as well. This is a picture of Moreton Bay, and you can see kind of a little faint purple line up there. You can't see it on the screen here, but the point is that approximately 500 kilometres of shoreline is what's been filmed by the community groups in Moreton Bay. Now that's pretty exciting, because they've done this over a number of years, but now they're starting to repeat it so that every year they do it again. So we're getting this constant monitoring, and what the monitoring ultimately is the report card of those sections of shoreline. It might be an island, it might be an estuary, as components of that, like the Brisbane River, for example. What happens is that then the information, the film is sent down from the scientists, from the community. We analyse it and then we send it to management or back to the community as reports, so that they have a constant flow of information that closes the loop, so there's constant feedback. Now, we're happy to talk to people in the community who want to do the assessment. We can train up to do that as well, but we've only had one case of that happen so far, and that was at a university in Florida, in the USA, where they wanted to do it themselves. It's great. We couldn't think of a better way to do it. Now, just to show you where those groups are, essentially, this is a very quick assessment of sites. I won't go into all the details. You can see the sort of thing here. You can see where Mackay is. We've got to start up a group here. I'd love to talk to you, anyone that wants to jump into that space. But the ones that I've highlighted with the red brackets, if you like, or the boxes, essentially are the Aboriginal ranger groups that are involved in mangrove watching. Sometimes that overlaps with communities, like it does or did in Port Curtis, where we also have the Society for Growing Australian Plants with Ruth and company. We're leading a charge there to do mangrove watch in Port Curtis area, but we also have rangers, and we're funded through the Gladstone Ports Corporation to bring that one off, and it's a 10-year program, so it's going well so far. And then there's the big picture, which is flying around in helicopters, and that helicopter work I'm adding because it gives you another dimension of landscape and scale, where we're filming these large sections of shoreline for different groups of funding comes in to do this, and that you can, like on the northwest coast and then the east coast, and then more recently with dieback in the Gulf, we also attracted other funding because we're doing this now, this massive shoreline surveys that involves filming every metre of shoreline, like for example the east coast, northeast coast, all the way from Cairns to Cape York. And if anyone knows that coastline, it's not a straight line, it's a lot of wiggling and so forth, and so was the northwest side too, of course. But what do we do with all this information is a fair question, and I'll get to that. But essentially we figure we filmed probably about over 10,000, getting on to 15,000 kilometres of shoreline of the coast, at least to establish a baseline. We're hoping that if we can get the government interested, because I think it's going to be a large chunk of money, to sort of maybe do this every 5 years or something, so that there's a proper marine assessment. And the reason I say that quite pointedly now is because that incident of dieback in the Gulf was not noticed for 5 months after it had occurred. You imagine 7,000 to 8,000 hectares of mangroves died and no government knew that it was happening. And that's pretty shameful, actually, in a country like ours, which has so many resources at our fingertips. It only came out by people who were visiting. It's a very remote area, I know, but people were sending back photographs, and finally, yes, they got recognised for that insight, and then it hit a lot of news. So I want to say that there's some words there, of course, about the methodology and what we're doing, but I want to point out that there's a website which is in development, essentially called Shoreview, which is about putting up all that information. So essentially, if you want to know what Shoreview does, it's Street View for coastlines. Essentially, we use that video that people are collecting, and we're trying to put it up as not as video, but as hyperlapse. In other words, film you can just scan along and look at the shoreline, just like, it's not as cool as Google, but we're hoping they'll give us a call one day. Or maybe they'll just steal it themselves. But still, they've got to come up with all that footage. It's a big thing to ask. So this is Shoreview. It shows a track along a satellite image. Anywhere along that track, you can tap and have a look, and you can see whatever filmings have been done in that location, in that shoreline. And also there'll be data backing that up as well, because we assess every 100 metres of shoreline. We do an assessment We get a lot of people to help us with that, to just tell us what's there. How big are the trees? Are they damaged? Is there erosion? Etc. So you can see, you can build up all these observations about how, I suppose, active these shorelines are. And of course, I have to say that if it's about the northeast coast and even the Gulf of Carpentaria, it's not just about that dieback incident, which was related to a drop in sea level, which was for an El Nino event, but there is this other huge elephant in the room, and that's the rising sea levels. And I showed a map at the last meeting I was at, and I haven't got it here, but I don't want to get too far into that and get wandering off. But the point is that the Gulf of Carpentaria and Torres Strait of Australia have 3 times the global average of sea level rise, right? Their sea level, I don't know why it can go up so quickly in one place and not everywhere else, but anyway, the point is that it's happening in those areas, and that there is saline encroachment, all the things you would expect sea level rise is happening. Terrestrial retreat, freshwater wetlands are being flooded now with salt water, and shorelines are eroding. This sort of survey method is showing all these things happening, and that'll come out as we start to publish this information. So what about the plants? Very briefly again. Essentially we have the book, and then I've got apps. So there's an app for all the world's mangroves, and then there's an app that is only on iDevices, iPhone, iPad, at this stage, but I require additional funding, which I haven't been able to achieve at this stage, another 10,000, and I can get it onto the Android version. But the Australia app is really cool because it has keys, and it'll tell you what species you should have at any location wherever you are. So when you turn on your app, you just have to go to your location search routine, and it'll give you a short list of the species, then you can look at all the parameters of that species, the flowers, the fruits, the trees. It will tell you when they're flowering and fruiting, or as much as I know anyway. And I'm always willing to hear from people who can tell me how to fix it, how to make it better. And so there's an app. And just to finish off, I want to say that essentially scientists are out there, but they're so thin on the ground that they need all the help they can get. So please join into some way of helping with this program, whether it be the Shoreview or the Mangrove Watch or this program, which we call the CHAMP, or the Coastal Health Archive and Monitoring Program. Essentially, this is where we bring in the community groups, etc., into this continuum of information where we're dealing with spatial information and information of plots on the ground, but also the community getting involved to bring in information as well. It's good fun, I'm told, and by the people who get involved, they love it. I mean, they say this is the best thing ever. How did anyone tell me that before? And it's just, it's like we can do fishing and we can do what we want, and we're also doing something valuable for our neighbourhood. I'm quite impressed. Also in this is that from this program we're also developing with others report card indicators that could go into online and continuous assessments for evaluations of ongoing records of health of any particular bits of shoreline. So, if you love fish, you've got to appreciate mangroves, okay? And thank you.